The Ashbringer, a war-storied smoke never left me. Even after the fires died out and the rubble cooled, even after we buried the bodies in quick graves, I could still smell it on my skin. It was the smell of burning plaster, charred wood, and flesh that never got the chance to grow old. They didn't attack a military base or a fortress or even a shipyard. No, they bombed an orphanage. It was just a group of old stone buildings on the edge of New Carthage, housing 200 children. Most of them were war refugees who had already lost everything once. Their laughter had been the last bright sound in a city full of hunger and exhaustion, and in one night, the enemy silenced it forever. I was there when it happened. That was the part that broke me in ways I still can't explain. I had been sent to deliver supplies, food, blankets, a few medical kits. Nothing dangerous, nothing important. I was sitting with the caretaker, a gray-haired woman who still carried herself like a soldier, drinking weak coffee and listening to the children playing outside. Then the air raid siren screamed. Too late, far too late. The first blast threw me against the wall and split my forehead open. The caretaker died instantly, shrapnel in her throat. I stumbled outside, dazed and with my ears ringing. All I saw was fire. Fire where the dormitory had been. Fire where the classroom stood. Fire swallowing children before they could even cry for help. I pulled out as many as I could. 4. Just for out of 200. When I staggered into the street carrying their trembling bodies, the world around me was nothing but dust, blood, and silence. Something inside me snapped that night. I had been a soldier before. I had fought battles, lost friends, stared down death. But this wasn't war. This was cruelty. This was the enemy telling us we weren't even worth fighting properly. That humanity was so far beneath them that children were fair targets. They thought we would break. They thought we would mourn in silence, bury the bodies, and surrender like cowards. Instead, we chose total war. The council hesitated, of course. They always did. Politicians who never saw battlefields wrung their hands and spoke of negotiations, of keeping the moral high ground. But men like me, the ones who had smelled that smoke and heard those screams, we weren't waiting. We gathered in basements, in ruined warehouses, in the shadows of cities they hadn't bombed yet. Veterans, smugglers, miners, farmers with nothing left to lose. We looked each other in the eye, and every single one of us carried the same fire burning in our chest. We didn't want justice. We didn't want peace. We wanted revenge. We wanted them to know that if they thought humanity would lie down and die, they had made the biggest mistake in the history of the stars. The first mission was small. A patrol ship. 3 of us slipped aboard with stolen clearance codes, planted charges in the reactor, and left its crew of 70 as drifting ash in space. The enemy didn't even notice at first. They thought it was an accident. The second mission was larger. A fuel depot on the moon of Eos. We turned it into a sun, killing hundreds, maybe thousands. That time they noticed. That time they started paying attention. And that was exactly what we wanted. I didn't sleep anymore. When I closed my eyes, I saw children's hands clawing at burning wood. So I stayed awake, planning, organizing, turning broken men and women into soldiers again. They thought the orphanage was the end of us, but it was only the beginning. They had no idea what kind of monsters they had created that night. Because once humanity decides on total war, there are no limits, no mercy, no surrender. We were coming for them. Every city, every fleet, every planet they had the arrogance to claim. We were going to show them what it meant to make war with mankind. And I swore on the ashes of those 200 children that we would not stop until they learned to fear the very word human. The night we destroyed the fuel depot on Eos, the stars themselves seemed to shudder. For the first time, the enemy felt a taste of what was coming. They had grown arrogant, used to crushing colonies, bombing cities, and watching broken survivors bow. But Eos was different. That depot was a lifeline, feeding their fleet that prowled the outer systems. When it went up in a bright explosion, it took 3 destroyers docked for resupply with it. And more importantly, the fire spread. Not real fire, but something just as deadly. Across human space, whispers began to spread. We are not powerless. That whisper was my weapon. The enemy wanted us afraid. Instead, we were furious. Fury, when sharpened, becomes a blade sharper than any forged metal. I spent sleepless days gathering men, training them, teaching them to fight like shadows. We couldn't match the enemy fleet for fleet, soldier for soldier. But we could cut out their heart piece by piece. They believed in clean wars, set battles. We believed in vengeance. The council tried to stop us. They sent messengers, even threats. They spoke of restraint, of human dignity. I laughed in their faces. Dignity? Tell that to the ashes of New Carthage's children. Tell it to the 4 orphans who clung to me at night. too scared to close their eyes. Dignity had burned with them. All that remained was war. I remember the night we began planning the strike that would mark the true turning point. We sat in the belly of a cargo ship, lights dimmed, huddled over stolen star maps. There was Kellen, a miner whose entire family had been taken for forced labor. Brant, a smuggler with a talent for explosives. And 2 others, each carrying scars deeper than flesh. They've stationed their fleet near Dross, Kellen said, his voice rough. Too heavy to hit head-on. Then we don't hit them head-on, I answered. We bleed them slow. Make every ship they deploy feel like a coffin waiting to close. We studied patterns, supply lines, maintenance schedules, the way their convoys moved. Like clockwork. That was their weakness. Order, predictability. They trusted their superiority too much, never expecting prey to bare teeth. The plan was brutal. But then, so were we. We would break into their forward operating base on Dross, sabotage their supply docks, and turn their own weapons against them. Not to destroy them completely, not yet, but to terrify. To send a message written in fire across the stars. The night before we left, I found myself staring at the orphans we had rescued from the ashes of New Carthage. They were asleep, curled together for warmth. One of them, a boy no older than 7, clutched the torn remains of a toy soldier. His face was calm, untroubled by the nightmares that haunted me, and I swore again, silently, that the enemy would pay for every breath he took without his parents. We reached Dross in silence, hidden in the cargo hold of a trade ship manned by sympathizers. The world was a frozen rock. The enemy's base was carved into its surface like a tumor. Towers of steel, hangars humming with energy, patrols pacing with mechanical precision from orbit. It looked impossible to attack from the ground. It was just another target waiting to be destroyed. We struck at night. That was our way, shadows moving through shadows. I remember the crunch of ice beneath my boots, the hiss of my own breath fogging my mask. Every step was planned, rehearsed. We bypassed their scanners with codes stolen from dead officers, silenced guards before they could even gasp. I killed 2 men that night with my knife, and their eyes are still burned into me, wide and confused. As they bled into the snow, I felt nothing. The heart of the base was the fuel storage. Rows upon rows of massive tanks filled with volatile plasma that fed the ships ruling the stars. We planted charges on every one of them. Brant worked fast, his hands steady despite the weight of what we were about to unleash. But it wasn't enough. We wanted more than destruction. We wanted terror. So we hacked into their communication systems, overriding their broadcast. When the alarms finally blared and soldiers scrambled, what they heard wasn't their commander's voice, but mine. You bombed our children, I growled into their frequencies. You thought we would break. Tonight, you learn what it means to make war with humanity. And then the first charge went off. The explosion tore through the night. A chain reaction that turned fuel tanks into suns. Fire raced along pipelines, swallowing hangars, ships, and men alike. The ground shook. Towers collapsed. The sky lit up as though the planet itself was bleeding fire. Soldiers screamed over the communications, their voices breaking into static as their world burned around them. We watched from the ridge, hidden in the smoke, not cheering, not smiling, just silent and grim. It wasn't joy we felt. It was justice. Cold, merciless justice. The death toll was staggering. Thousands, maybe more. Their fleet was crippled, forced to retreat, and for the first time, the galaxy saw what humanity was capable of when pushed afar. The enemy struck back quickly. They bombed 3 more colonies, trying to scare us back into submission. But instead of fear, they planted rage. For every city they burned, 10 men joined our cause. For every child they killed, 100 swore vengeance. The galaxy was turning red, and we were the ones painting it. I became a name they cursed in their councils. The Butcher of Dross, they called me. A monster, a terrorist, a demon wrapped in human skin. They weren't wrong. I had become all of those things. And I embraced it, because monsters were what humanity needed now. Monsters who could look at a burning orphanage and decide the stars themselves had to pay. We struck again and again. Convoys vanished into ambushes. Patrol ships turned up drifting and empty. Crews executed with precision. Entire outposts burned in the night. We didn't fight for territory. We fought for fear. And slowly, the balance shifted. The enemy had the numbers, the weapons, the fleets, but we had fury. We had nothing left to lose, and that made us invincible. The first time they tried to negotiate, it was almost laughable. A messenger ship arrived under a flag of truce. Demanding talks, they spoke of mutual respect, of reducing tensions. I let them finish their speech. then had Brant detonate the charges we'd planted under their landing pad. The messenger ship and everyone aboard went up in flames. There is no truce. I broadcast to the stars. Not until every one of you pays. It was reckless, yes, but it worked. Fear spread through their ranks. Soldiers began deserting. Colonies loyal to them started whispering about rebellion. They had awakened something they couldn't put back in its cage. And still, it wasn't enough. Not for me. Because every time I closed my eyes, I saw that orphanage burning. And I knew that no matter how many of them we killed, it would never balance the scales. But by God, I was going to try. The turning point came during what they later called the Siege of Carvos. Their fleet cornered us on a barren moon, outnumbered 10-1. They thought they had us finished. They thought humanity's flame would be snuffed out once and for all. But we had planned for it. We lured them in, made them believe we were trapped, and when their ships descended, we detonated the mines we buried deep within the moon's crust. Entire fleets shattered in the blast, torn apart by fire and rock. The survivors limped away. Broken and demoralized. That was the night the galaxy understood. Humanity wasn't prey anymore. We were predators, and as I stood on the scorched ground of Carvos, watching enemy wreckage rain from the sky, I felt a grim satisfaction settle in my chest. Not joy, not triumph, just the cold certainty that we had crossed a line there was no coming back from. They had bombed an orphanage thinking it would break us. Instead, they had taught us how to make war without limits. And now, the war had only just begun. When word reached us that the enemy had fortified their border worlds, I felt a strange calm settle in my bones. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't doubt. It was the steady certainty of a man who knows exactly what must be done, no matter the cost. They wanted to hide behind their walls, their cities, their fleets. Fine. We would tear those walls down brick by brick. We had hunted them in the shadows long enough. Hit-and-run raids, sabotage, ambushes. That was the birth of our war, and it had served us well. But now it was time to show them what humanity could do. When we didn't just fight like ghosts in the dark, but struck openly like wolves showing their teeth under the sun. The first target was a farming world, Orphan Prime. It wasn't their home world, but it was close enough, rich with crops that fed their fleets and citizens alike. They thought no human force would dare strike so deep into their territory. That arrogance was their downfall. We came in on stolen ships, painted in their colors, with codes forged from the corpses of their officers. By the time their orbital defenses realized something was wrong, it was already too late. We stormed their cities with a fury that could not be contained. Every street became a battlefield. Every building was a tomb waiting to be filled. I remember the first time I saw their civilians up close. Not soldiers or commanders, but the people who had cheered. While their armies slaughtered our colonies, some begged for mercy, falling to their knees. Hands raised. I saw their eyes. Eyes that might have once looked at news screens showing burning human cities, and felt nothing but satisfaction. I should have felt pity. Instead, I felt nothing at all. We gave no mercy. Our orders were simple: make Orphan Prime uninhabitable. If their fleets fed on the grain of that planet, then their fleets would starve. Fields burned, storage buildings exploded, water supplies were poisoned. Their people fled into the countryside, hunted like animals. Some of my men hesitated at first. Killing soldiers was one thing, but civilians. I silenced their doubts with a single question: did they hesitate? When they bombed New Carthage's children, the answer was written on their faces. After that, there were no more questions. Only fire. By the time we left, Orphan Prime was a wasteland. Their skies were black with smoke, their rivers ran red with ash, and the enemy council knew humanity had crossed another line. They weren't just losing ships and soldiers anymore. They were losing their future. But even as we celebrated our victory, something in me began to shift. That night, when the fires still lit the horizon, I found myself alone in the ruins of a farmhouse. The family that had lived there lay dead. In the corner, a mother clutching her child's body, eyes wide and glassy with fear. For a moment, I saw not them, but the children of New Carthage, burned, silent, forever frozen in fire. And then the thought struck me: was I becoming the very thing I hated? I forced the thought down. Pity was weakness, and weakness had no place in this war. But it lingered in the corners of my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake. The raids grew worse. We moved from Orphan Prime to other worlds, striking deeper each time. Every world we touched was left scarred, burned, broken. We weren't just crippling their armies. We were dismantling their civilization. And the galaxy was watching. Other races, ones that had once dismissed us as primitives, began to whisper. Some joined us out of fear or respect. Others stayed silent. But I saw it in their eyes when we passed. They no longer looked at humans as prey. They looked at us as predators, dangerous, unpredictable, ruthless, and still the enemy resisted. They gathered their fleets, regrouped, struck back where they could. Entire human colonies were wiped out in revenge. The war became a spiral of slaughter. Each atrocity fed the next. We bombed their cities. They burned our farms. We executed their prisoners. They crucified ours in public squares. Humanity had lit a fire that could no longer be contained, and it was consuming everything. I became something else in those days. Not a man, not even a soldier. A symbol. A monster wrapped in human skin. The enemy gave me names meant to terrify: the Ashbringer, the Butcher, the Phantom of Dross. My own people whispered my name with awe and fear. Children on shattered colonies were told bedtime stories about me, not as a hero, but as a warning. Don't cross him, or he'll bring hell to your door. And the truth, they weren't wrong. Because the deeper we pushed into enemy territory, the more ruthless I became. When soldiers hesitated, I shot them myself. When civilians resisted, I ordered their entire towns burned. Mercy had died in New Carthage, and I carried its corpse with me wherever I went. But the nightmares came too. In the silence between battles, when the gunfire stopped and the screams faded, I would see faces in the dark. The children of New Carthage, the mother and child on Orphan Prime. The eyes of soldiers I had killed with my own hands. They stared at me, accusing, silent. I told myself it was weakness, that I could bury it in blood. But it gnawed at me, hollowing me from the inside. The breaking point came at Vios. We had cornered a garrison in the city's heart. Hundreds of soldiers barricaded. In a hospital, my men wanted to storm it, fight room by room. But I knew that would cost us dearly. So, I made the choice. We sealed the doors and set the building on fire. Screams echoed for hours as fire devoured everything inside. That night, as the city burned, one of my men, Kellen, the miner who had been with me since the beginning, confronted me. "You're not fighting for humanity anymore," he said, his face pale in the firelight. "You're fighting for yourself, for your hate." I stared at him, hand on my weapon. For a moment, I considered killing him then and there. But something in his words cut deeper than any blade. Maybe he was right. Maybe I wasn't fighting for humanity. Maybe I was fighting because I no longer knew how to stop. Still, I couldn't admit it. Not then, not ever. So I told him the only truth I could cling to. They killed our children. Until every one of them is ashes, I won't stop. He said nothing after that. Just walked away, his shadow long against the flames. And so we pressed on into deeper space. Closer to their core worlds. Every strike left me emptier. But every strike also brought us closer to the vengeance I craved. The enemy was bleeding. Now, desperate, afraid. And when their leaders finally begged for peace, offering terms, treaties, concessions, I spat on their words. Peace. There was no peace, not anymore. They had taught us total war. And now we were giving it back to them 100-fold. And as I looked at the smoldering ruins of Vios, I realized something that chilled me more than any enemy weapon ever could. Even if we won, even if we burned their entire empire to the ground, there would be nothing left of me to return home to. Because the man who had once carried food to orphans in New Carthage was gone, and in his place stood something else. Something forged in fire, sharpened by hate, sustained only by blood. A monster humanity needed, but still a monster. The path to their homeworld was carved in fire. Every fleet they sent to stop us, we shattered. Every colony that resisted, we burned. Every plea for mercy was drowned beneath the roar of our vengeance. Word spread across the galaxy that humanity was coming, and nothing could stop us. For the first time in history, the enemy found themselves truly afraid. But fear wasn't enough for me. Fear could fade. Fear could be forgotten. What I wanted, what I needed, was permanence. I wanted their home world itself reduced to ashes. I wanted their children to grow up with the sky forever scarred, a reminder etched into their very blood that they should never have dared to touch ours. So, we gathered everything we had. The fleets we had stolen, the armies we had raised, the worlds we had conquered. Humanity had never been so united, never been so single-minded. Every soldier, every ship, every bullet carried the same message: this is for New Carthage. When the order was given, we moved like wolves who had scented blood. Their home system was heavily defended, of course, dozens of fleets, orbital platforms, planetary shields that shimmered like God's armor. They believed themselves untouchable. But arrogance blinds, and we knew how to exploit it. We came not in one wave, but many, scattered fleets, raiding parties, suicide runs that tore at the edges of their defenses. We bled them piece by piece, forcing them to exhaust themselves to spread their forces thin. And when they thought they had weathered the storm, when they thought humanity had given everything it had, we unleashed the full weight of our fury. I stood on the bridge of our flagship, a vessel once theirs, now draped in human banners, watching the void ignite with battle. Our ships darted between theirs like daggers, striking fast, retreating, striking again. Mines detonated in patterns only we knew. Suicide runs turned entire cruisers into fireballs. The battle raged for days. Blood and fire filled the void, wreckage blotting out the stars. And through it all, one truth became undeniable: we would not be stopped out at last. Their fleets broke, shattered, rooted. Their home world lay bare before us, its shields flickering under the pounding of our guns. When the order came to bombard the planet, I hesitated, not because I doubted, but because the weight of it pressed down on me like a mountain. This wasn't a colony. This wasn't an outpost. This was their heart, their cradle, their pride. Destroying it meant destroying not just their army, but their soul. And I knew that once we did this, there was no going back. I looked around the bridge. My men watched me, eyes burning with rage, with hunger. They wanted blood. They wanted fire. They wanted vengeance. They wanted me to give the word. I thought of New Carthage, of the children screaming in the fire, of the 4 I had carried from the rubble, their tiny hands clinging to me, of the promise I had made to the ashes of 200 others, and I gave the order: burn it. The sky above their world became a storm of fire. Missiles, plasma, kinetic strikes, all hurled downward with merciless precision. Cities erupted into flame, towers toppled, highways melted into rivers of molten stone. Their defenses tried to fight back, but it was useless. Humanity's wrath was a tide, and no wall could hold it. I watched entire continents vanish in smoke, saw oceans boil, saw millions die in firestorms that painted the night sky crimson. Their cries filled the communications channels, desperate pleas for mercy, for surrender, for anything but annihilation. I cut the channel. Mercy had died on New Carthage. For 3 days and nights, the bombardment continued. By the time the guns fell silent, their world was unrecognizable. Cities reduced to craters. Forests turned to ash. The once blue seas were black, choking with debris and corpses. We had done it. We had broken them. And yet, as I stared down at the ruins of their homeworld, I felt no triumph, no relief, only emptiness. The war should have ended there. With their homeworld shattered, their fleets destroyed, their leaders dead, there was nothing left to fight for. Humanity had won, but inside me, the fire still burned. The hate hadn't been quenched. It had grown, because even as I looked at their ruined world, I still saw New Carthage burning. I still heard the children's screams, and I knew that no matter how much blood we spilled, it would never be enough. That night, in the silence of the flagship, Kellen came to me again. His face was pale, hollow, his eyes shadowed by years of war. "It's over," he said. "We've won. They're finished. We don't have to keep killing." I stared at him, my hands clenched into fist. "Do you think 200 children rest easier because we stopped here?" He didn't answer, just looked at me with something that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't trust either. "You've become what you swore to destroy," he whispered finally, and maybe he was right. Maybe I had become the monster I hated. But what did it matter? Humanity needed monsters. Someone to carry the hate, to wield it like a weapon. Someone who would never forget what had been done. I dismissed him with a wave, but his words lingered. That night, I dreamed of New Carthage again. But this time, when the orphanage burned, the screams weren't theirs, they were mine. And in the flames, I saw my own face staring back at me. Twisted, monstrous, unrecognizable. I woke in a cold sweat, the taste of ash in my mouth. And I realized, with a clarity sharper than any blade, that Callum was right. The war was won, but I was lost. Still, I pressed on. There was no other path. If humanity was to rise from the ashes, then someone had to bear the weight of its sins. Someone had to become the monster the galaxy feared. And so, even as the enemy's homeworld smoldered beneath us, I prepared for what came next, because I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of humanity's rule. And if that rule was built on fire and blood, then so be it. For I had sworn an oath long ago in the ruins of an orphanage. An oath that could never be broken. Victory should have felt like salvation. We had broken their fleets, burned their colonies, and turned their home world into a graveyard. Across human space, people cheered. Holograms flickered with my name, my face, my voice. The Ashbringer, the butcher of Orthan, the man who brought them to their knees. The council, once trembling and indecisive, now paraded our victories as their own. They called it the dawn of a new era, humanity's rightful place among the stars. Statues rose in our honor, songs were written, children dressed as soldiers and marched in the streets. And yet, behind the cheering, I felt nothing but rot, because I knew the truth. We hadn't just won. We had lost something far greater. We had become monsters. It began in whispers. Men who once swore vengeance now muttered doubts in the dark. They looked at the smoldering ruins of enemy cities and asked questions they hadn't dared voice before. Questions like, hadn't we already avenged New Carthage? How many more worlds needed to burn? How much blood would be enough? And those whispers reached me. Kellen was the loudest voice among them. He had fought beside me since the first raids, carried scars that ran deeper than bone. But his eyes had changed. I saw it when he looked at the wreckage of their homeworld. He wasn't filled with fire anymore. He was hollow, like the killing had drained something from him that would never return. One night, in the ruins of their capital, he came to me. The streets still smoldered, the air thick with the stench of death. He stood across from me, jaw tight, fist clenched. It's done, he said. They're broken. There's nothing left to fight. I shook my head. There are still pockets of resistance. Fleets scattered. Colonies that might rise again. If we don't finish this, they'll come back stronger. His eyes narrowed. Or maybe we've become exactly what we swore to destroy. The words stung because they echoed my own unspoken thoughts. But I buried the sting beneath cold steel. Do you think they cared about right and wrong when they burned New Carthage? I growled. When they bombed an orphanage, mercy didn't stop them. Only fear will. Fear so deep it burns into their children's children. That's the only way this ends. He shook his head slowly. No, that's how it never ends. I almost drew my weapon then. Almost silenced him like I had silenced so many others. But something held me back. Maybe the memory of who he had been before the war. Maybe the ghost of the man I once was. Instead, I turned away. Stand with me or don't, I said. But I won't stop. He left without another word. The cracks widened. Some soldiers stayed loyal, eyes burning with the same fury that had carried us this far. Others hesitated, haunted by the faces of the civilians they'd slaughtered, the cities they burned, camps divided. Men argued in whispers, fist flew. In the dark, it came to a head on the world of Maraudus. We had cornered one of the last major enemy fleets in orbit. Their ships were battered and outnumbered. They signaled surrender. Their captains offered to lay down their arms, to hand over their vessels and men. My officers looked to me, waiting for the order. For a long moment, I stood silent, staring at the blinking lights of their transmissions. Surrender. It should have been everything we wanted. Proof that we had won. A chance to end it all without another drop of blood. But when I closed my eyes, I didn't see surrendering soldiers. I saw burning children. Destroy them, I said. A murmur rippled across the bridge. Shock, hesitation. But no one disobeyed. Our guns opened fire. The enemy ships, powerless and unarmed, erupted into fire one by one. Thousands died without a chance to fight back. When it was done, silence filled the air. Not triumph, not celebration, just silence. Later, I found Kellen waiting in my quarters. His face was hard, eyes hollow. But his voice shook with rage. They surrendered, he said. You killed them anyway. That wasn't war. That was murder. I stepped close enough to see the scar running down his cheek. A scar I remembered him earning in the tunnels of Dross. They murdered children, I hissed. 200 orphans burned alive. Every breath we take is owed to them. Don't you dare tell me it was murder. It was justice. He stared at me, breathing hard. No, it was you feeding your hate. And one day, it's going to eat us all. The rebellion began in whispers, just as the doubt had. Small groups breaking away, refusing orders, disappearing into the void. At first, I dismissed it. Cowards. Weak men who didn't have the stomach to see this war through. But soon, it became undeniable. Ships vanished. Outposts went silent. Rumors spread of human soldiers refusing to fight, of men raising arms against their own. And always, Callan's name at the center of it. Part of me wanted to hunt him down, to silence him once and for all. But another part, a darker part, wanted him alive. Because as long as he walked the stars, as long as his voice carried through the shadows, I had an enemy to justify my hate. The council grew nervous. They saw the cracks in our unity, feared the war would turn inward. They begged me to ease up, to show restraint, to let peace settle now that humanity had risen. I ignored them. Politicians knew nothing of blood. But at night, when I closed my eyes, the doubt gnawed at me. Not just doubt about Kellen, not just doubt about the war, but about myself. Because the man I had been before the orphanage, before the fire, would have spat in the face of the monster I had become. And still, I pressed on. The war against the remnants dragged on longer than I had expected. For every colony we burned, 2 more resisted. For every fleet we destroyed, stragglers found ways to fight back. It was never ending. An ocean of blood that swallowed everything in its path. And somewhere in that ocean, I realized something terrible. I didn't want it to end. The war was all I had left. Without it, I would be nothing but a man haunted by ghosts. Without it, I would have to face what I had become. So I fed it, nurtured it. Fan the flames even as the galaxy trembled. My soldiers called me commander. The council called me a hero. The enemy called me a monster. And in the dark, when no one could hear, I called myself nothing at all. It was on the burned plains of Serethis that I finally saw Callan again. His men had risen against ours, ambushing one of our convoys. We tracked them, cornered them in the ruins of a city that had once been theirs. When I found him, he wasn't hiding. He stood in the open, rifle lowered, eyes steady. Behind him, his men aimed their weapons, but none fired. It ends here, he said. I raised my gun. You think you can stop me? He shook his head. No, but I can remind you of who you were. The words cut deeper than any bullet. Who I was. I tried to remember. The man who carried food to orphans. Who fought for justice. Who believed in something more than hate. But he was gone. Buried in fire and ash. You're too late, I said. That man died in New Carthage. Kellen's eyes didn't waver. Then maybe it's time you joined him. We stared at each other across the ruins. Weapons raised, soldiers tense. For a moment, the galaxy held its breath. And I realized the greatest threat to me wasn't the enemy we had fought so long. It was the man standing before me. The friend who still carried a piece of the humanity I had lost. The standoff didn't end that night. Shots weren't fired. But the war had shifted. Now it wasn't just humanity against the galaxy. It was humanity against itself. And I stood at the center, torn between the monster I had become and the man I had buried in the ashes of New Carthage. The war should have ended with their home world in ashes. Instead, it only fractured. We had clawed our way from prey to predator, dragging humanity into the center of the galaxy stage. But instead of standing united, our victory splintered us. The soldiers who had once roared my name in battle now whispered doubts in the dark. Colonies that had bled for vengeance now spoke of peace. And everywhere, in every whisper of rebellion, I heard one name, Callan. He had become a ghost in my war, slipping from world to world, speaking words sharper than blades. Men who had followed me for years now abandoned their posts to join him. He called for restraint, for rebuilding, for humanity to stop before we became indistinguishable from the monsters we had fought. His words spread like infection. At first, I tried to stamp it out the way I always had, with fire. Camps suspected of harboring his followers were destroyed. Ships that carried defectors were hunted and blown apart. But the more blood I spilled, the more his shadow grew. Every act of ruthlessness that once made men fear me now drove them into his arms. For the first time since New Carthage, I felt something I hadn't in years. Doubt. It boiled over on Serethis. We had tracked a convoy of defectors fleeing to join Callan's forces. They were families, soldiers, wives, children, old men too broken to fight. My officers urged caution. They whispered that killing civilians now would only strengthen the rebellion. But I silenced them. No one walks away, I said. We descended on the convoy with fire and steel. Ships screamed as we tore them from the sky, bodies scattering across the barren plains. When it was done, silence fell. A silence heavier than any battle I'd ever fought. My men didn't cheer. They didn't roar victory. They only watched me, eyes hollow, faces pale. And in that silence, I felt their loyalty crack. That night, as I sat in the ruins of the enemy city hall, my command post now, Brant came to me. Brant, who had been with me since the fuel depot on Eos, who had planted bombs with steady hands while his world burned. He looked at me the way Callan once had. Not as a commander, not even as a man, but as something less. They were children, he said quietly. Children, Commander. I rose from my chair, my hand finding the pistol at my side. Children grow up, I said. And when they grow, they remember. You want them to rise against us in 20 years, 30. His jaw tightened, but he didn't move. Or maybe they would have remembered us as the ones who spared them. Maybe that would have been enough. I should have killed him then. That's what the monster in me demanded. But I didn't. I turned away. And in that moment of hesitation, I knew I had lost him. The next morning, he was gone. And with him, half the men under my command, the rebellion erupted like wildfire. Colonies raised banners not against the enemy, but against me. Ships once loyal to my fleet turned their guns on ours. It was no longer humanity versus the galaxy. It was humanity devouring itself. The Council, those weak-willed parasites who had once begged me to save them, now wavered. They whispered of removing me, of replacing me with someone reasonable, someone who would end the bloodshed. I should have crushed them then, but part of me wanted them to speak. I wanted them to admit aloud what I already knew. They had ridden my fury to victory, and now they wanted to discard me like a weapon too sharp for their hands. Kellen struck first. His fleet ambushed ours on the edge of the Cryos belt, where ice and shadow swallowed entire ships. He didn't fight like the enemy had. He fought like I had taught him, striking fast, hitting supply lines, bleeding us dry. It was like staring into a mirror, watching my own tactics used against me. The first battle cost us dearly. Ships lost, men captured, and for the first time, my soldiers began to ask what we were fighting for. I told them the same thing I had always said: New Carthage, the orphanage, the children. But even as the words left my mouth, I saw the way they looked at me, not with fire, not with conviction, but with doubt. The second battle came on the world of Eridan. Kellen struck hard, his ships descending from orbit like hawks. We fought street to street, building to building, human against human. The enemy we had once sworn to destroy was long forgotten. The war was ours now, and it was eating us alive. I faced Kellen again in those streets, amid the fire and rubble. Our eyes met across the chaos. He raised his weapon, but he didn't fire. Neither did I for a moment. The battle raged around us, men dying in screams and blood, but the two of us stood frozen. Then he lowered his rifle. "This isn't what we fought for," he shouted above the roar. "Look around you. We've become worse than them." I felt the weight of his words pressing against the cracks in my soul, but I couldn't let it show. "They killed our children," I roared back. "Every drop of blood we spill is justice." His eyes narrowed, and in them I saw pity. The same pity I had once buried in the ruins of Orphan Prime. "No," he said. "It's hate, and it's killing us all." Before I could answer, an explosion tore the street apart, separating us in fire and dust. By the time the smoke cleared, he was gone again. The war dragged on. Weeks turned to months, months to years. The enemy we had sworn vengeance against was nothing but ash, forgotten footnotes in a war that had outlived them. The galaxy no longer whispered of humanity's rise. They whispered of humanity's madness. Some called me savior still, others called me tyrant. The truth, I think, was somewhere in between. I ruled not with hope, but with fear. Fleets obeyed because they were too afraid to defy. Colonies sent tribute not out of loyalty, but because they knew what happened to those who resisted. And yet every day, Kellen's shadow grew. His rebellion spread, not because he was stronger, but because he was right. One night, I walked the ruins of a burned city alone. The stars were hidden behind smoke, the air thick with the stink of charred flesh, and in the silence, I heard the echoes of laughter, children's laughter. For a heartbeat, I thought it was memory, but then I saw them. For children, the ones I had carried from the ruins of New Carthage, standing before me. They weren't real. I knew that. They were ghosts, fragments of a man I had long since buried. But still, they stared at me with wide, accusing eyes. "You promised," one of them whispered. "You promised you'd make it right." "I did," I said, falling to my knees. "I burned them. I burned it all for you." But their faces twisted, not in gratitude, but in horror. "You became them," another said. "You burned more than they ever did." I tried to scream, but no sound came. When I blinked, they were gone, leaving only the ash. And for the first time in years, I wept out the war between us, and them had ended long ago. Now the war was within me, and I knew the final battle wasn't against fleets or armies. It was against Kellen, against the man who still carried the last piece of humanity I had lost, because as long as he lived, the question would remain, was I a savior, or just another monster? And one day soon, that question would be answered in blood. The war had narrowed down to one man. Not fleets, not colonies, not entire worlds. Just one man, Kellen. Every report I received, every whisper carried through the void, came back to him. His rebellion spread like fire across dry grass. Colonies once loyal to me raised his banners. Fleets defected. Even some of my closest officers disappeared, taking their men and ships to his side. It wasn't numbers that made him dangerous. It was belief. He gave people something I could no longer offer, hope. Me, I offered only fear. And fear, no matter how sharp, dulls with time. The showdown came on the world of Varys, a scarred rock caught between two dying suns. It was uninhabitable, little more than stone and ash, but strategically vital, a shipyard the enemy had once used, now fallen into human hands. Kellen's fleet had taken it, and I couldn't allow that. We arrived with everything I had left. Not much anymore, but still enough to burn a planet. Warships scarred from years of battle. Soldiers hardened by slaughter. Men who had followed me so long they no longer knew anything but blood. The battle in orbit lasted for 3 days. His ships moved like knives, darting in and out, striking with precision. Mine hammered back with raw, relentless force. The skies filled with fire. Wreckage blotted out the twin suns. On the 4th day, the shipyard itself became the battleground. Our forces clashed in the broken hangars and skeletal docks, metal groaning under the weight of our fury. Human against human, brother against brother. No alien enemies here. Just us, tearing ourselves apart. I fought my way through the wreckage, every step echoing with the ghost of all the wars that had brought me here. Blood coated the walls. Screams echoed through the steel. My soldiers moved beside me, grim and silent. At last, I found him. Kellen stood at the center of the shipyard's ruined command tower, rifle lowered. Armor scorched but unbroken. Behind him, his men watched with tense eyes, weapons at the ready. But he didn't raise his gun. He just stared at me, the weight of years in his eyes. "It ends here," he said. His voice was steady, calm, as if the chaos outside meant nothing. I raised my weapon. "You're right. It ends with you." He shook his head. "No, it ends with us. One way or another." For a moment, silence stretched between us. The screams of men dying outside faded. The rumble of ships overhead became distant. It was just the two of us, standing on the bones of everything we had built and destroyed. "You think you've saved humanity," Kellen said, stepping forward. "But look around you. What's left? Ruined worlds, burned cities, fleets fighting each other. You didn't save us. You doomed us." I felt the fire rising in me, the same fire that had carried me from New Carthage to here. "I gave us fear. I gave us respect. They bombed our children, and now the galaxy will never forget what happens when you touch humanity. And at what cost?" He demanded. "How many children have we burned since? How many cities have we reduced to ash? Tell me, do you even remember their faces anymore? Or do you only remember the hate?" The words cut deep, sharper than any blade. Because I did remember. I remembered every face, every scream, every hand reaching for mercy I had denied. They haunted me in the silence between battles. But I couldn't let him see that. "They made us monsters," I growled. "I just made sure the galaxy learned to fear those monsters." He shook his head. "No, you chose this. We all lost something that day on New Carthage, but you let it consume you. You stopped fighting for humanity a long time ago. Now you're fighting only for yourself, for your hate." My men shifted behind me, uneasy. I could feel their doubt pressing in, the cracks widening. They were waiting to see what I would do. Waiting to see if I was the man they had followed all these years, or just the monster Kellen claimed I had become. I raised my weapon higher. "Step aside, Kellen, or I'll end this here." His eyes didn't flinch. He didn't move. "You can kill me," he said quietly, "but you can't kill the truth. They'll still know. They'll know you led them into darkness and called it victory." The words burned because in the pit of my soul, I feared he was right. The standoff stretched. My finger hovered on the trigger. My heartbeat thundering in my ears. Every instinct screamed to pull it, to silence him once and for all. But something in his eyes, something unbroken, something human, held me frozen. And then, in the silence, I heard it. Children's laughter. Not real, of course, just ghost. The same ghost that had haunted me since New Carthage. But it was enough. My hand shook. My vision blurred. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of everything I had done pressing down like a mountain. Maybe Kellen was right. Maybe I hadn't saved humanity at all. Maybe I had damned it before I could decide. The battle found us. The tower shook as an explosion ripped through its side. Men shouting, debris crashing down. Gunfire erupted, and suddenly the room was chaos. My soldiers fired. His soldiers fired back. Blood sprayed across the steel. Screams filled the air. And, in the middle of it, Kellen and I stood locked, weapons raised, eyes burning with everything we had carried since the orphanage. I don't remember pulling the trigger. I don't even remember the sound. I only remember the silence after. Kellen was on the ground, blood spreading across his armor, his eyes still locked on mine. For a moment, I thought he was dead. But then he coughed weakly, his lips twisting into something like a smile. "Maybe this is what you wanted," he whispered, "but it's not what they needed." And then his eyes closed. My men pulled me back as the tower collapsed around us. We fled into the burning wreckage, leaving his body behind. The battle raged on, but I barely saw it. All I saw was his face, his words, the truth I had spent years burying beneath blood. Because maybe he was right. Maybe I hadn't saved humanity at all. Maybe I had destroyed it. But even his doubt gnawed at me. Another truth burned hotter. The galaxy still feared us. And fear, even built on ash and lies, was enough. So I told myself, as the fires of Varys burned, it didn't matter what I had become. It didn't matter what ghost haunted me. All that mattered was that the galaxy would never again dare to touch humanity, even if it meant humanity had to fear me too. The fires of Varys burned for weeks. Wreckage drifted in orbit, the shattered husks of ships that had once carried hope below. The surface was a graveyard of steel and blood. The shipyard was gone. The towers reduced to ash, the ground littered with corpses, human corpses. We had fought the war to avenge our dead, and in the end, all we had managed was to pile more bodies onto the heap. Kellen was gone. His rebellion shattered, his men scattered. Word spread that he had fallen in the battle, cut down in the command tower. Some whispered I had killed him myself. Others whispered he still lived, carried into the void by the few loyal enough to drag his body from the flames. I didn't correct them. I didn't confirm, because the truth was heavier than I could bear. When I returned to the flagship, the men no longer cheered. They didn't look at me with fire in their eyes, or fear, or even loyalty. They just looked hollow. The council hailed me as the man who had preserved unity, who had put down the rebellion, who had secured humanity's future. They held parades, raised monuments, declared the beginning of a golden age, but I saw the cracks. Colonies simmered with resentment. Soldiers whispered of Kellen's words. The galaxy, once terrified, now looked at us with something colder than fear, disgust. They saw us not as avengers, not as saviors, but as butchers to blinded by hate to know when to stop. And deep inside, I knew they were right. I walked the halls of the flagship alone, the silence pressing down like a weight. The walls, once alive with the hum of purpose, now felt like tombs. My reflection stared back from the steel, scarred, hollow-eyed, more ghost than man. I had fought for New Carthage, for the 200 children who burned in the orphanage, for the 4 I had carried from the rubble, their small hands clinging to mine. But what would they see now if they looked at me? Not a savior, not a protector, just another monster who burned children, only on a grander scale. The galaxy feared me. Humanity feared me. And in the rare moments when I allowed myself to think, I feared myself too. One night, I found myself in the observation deck, staring at the stars. The void stretched endless, littered with the bones of ships. And for the first time since the orphanage, I let myself ask the question I had buried. Beneath fire and blood, was it worth it? Was vengeance worth the cost? 200 children had died in New Carthage. How many thousands had I burned in their name? How many cities had I turned to ash? How many lives had I snuffed out, chasing a justice that never came? The answer came not in words, but in the silence of the stars. It hadn't been worth it. Nothing could ever be worth it. I dreamed again, the same dream that had haunted me for years. The orphanage burning, children screaming, smoke choking the sky. But this time, when I ran into the fire, when I tried to pull them out, I saw something different. It wasn't the enemy dropping the bombs. It was me. My hands lit the fire. My voice gave the order. And the children screamed, not in terror of the enemy, but of me. I woke drenched in sweat, my chest heaving, my heart pounding. And for the first time, I understood the truth I had spent so long denying. I had become what I hated. The enemy had bombed an orphanage and awakened a monster. And that monster had carried humanity into the stars, leaving only fire in its wake. The council wanted me to stay, to rule, to shape the new order with my iron hand. They said humanity needed strength, that without me, we would fracture, fall back into chaos. But I knew the truth. I wasn't strength. I was a wound that refused to close. As long as I lived, as long as my shadow stretched across the stars, humanity would never heal. They would never forgive. They would never move on. So I left out no fanfare, no speech, no farewell. I simply took a ship, one scarred vessel still capable of flight, and slipped into the void. I wander now through ruins of battles past, through burned worlds and shattered fleets. I drift from system to system, a ghost in the galaxy I scarred. Some worlds curse my name. Others whisper it in fear. A few still call me savior, though their voices sound hollow even to themselves. I don't answer them. I don't argue. I don't defend, because what defense is there for what I have done? I sit in the silence of the void, and I remember the laughter of children, The fire, the screams. Callan's voice telling me I had become worse than the enemy. The look in his eyes before they closed forever. Those memories are my only companions now. My only punishment. My only truth. Humanity has risen. The galaxy knows our name. They fear us as I swore they would. No one will ever again dare to bomb an orphanage or slaughter our children or treat us as prey. But the cost was everything. The galaxy may fear us, but they will never love us. They will never trust us. They will never see us as anything but butchers with fire in our veins. And maybe they're right. Maybe that's all we are now. Sometimes I think of Kellen. I wonder if he truly died in the fires of Varys, or if he escaped into the void like I did, carrying with him the last fragile piece of humanity I shattered. I wonder if his words live on, whispered in quiet corners, a seed waiting to grow. I almost hope they do, because humanity doesn't need another monster. Like me, it needs someone who remembers what we were before the fire. Someone who can rebuild from the ashes, not add more to them. But it won't be me. I am the Ashbringer. The monster they created. The monster humanity followed. The monster who burned the galaxy so no one would ever forget New Carthage. That is my legacy. Not salvation, not justice, not victory, just ash. And yet, when I close my eyes, when the silence of the void wraps around me, I still hear them. The laughter of children. For a heartbeat, it almost sounds real. Almost.